converging from multiple directions. This was no ordinary strike. It was a calculated, high-stakes assault aimed at cutting a vital sea supply line, threatening Ukraine's energy lifeline and shipping routes. In seconds, the calm would shatter, and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare. The first wave hit just minutes after radar operators on the Ukrainian escort ships picked up the inbound signatures. From beneath the surface, a Russian Kilo-class submarine fired a spread of Caliber cruise missiles, each tearing through the night at nearly 550 miles per hour. Overhead, Su-35 fighters swooped low, releasing guided bombs meant to break apart the convoy before it could maneuver. For the Ukrainians, it was the classic hammer and anvil tactic subsurface strikes forcing evasive turns, while fast jets pressed from above. But the defenders had prepared. Almost instantly, Ukrainian commanders ordered up swarms of suicide drones and recon UAVs, their small electric motors whispering into the darkness. These drones fanned outward, feeding back targeting data and marking the paths of incoming missiles. Within moments, launch orders rippled across the convoy. From the decks of frigates and corvettes, Neptune anti-ship missiles and Sea Sparrow interceptors streaked skyward, leaving trails of fire and smoke. The clash unfolded in seconds. Dozens of bright arcs crossed above the water, exploding midair with thunder that shook the sea itself. Chunks of flaming debris rained down, hissing as they struck the waves. Some calibers disintegrated under the defensive curtain, but others pressed forward, weaving through the chaos. The sky over the Black Sea was no longer silent. It was a storm of steel and fire, the prelude to a night that would test every defense Ukraine could muster. The air above the Black Sea burned with chaos as fragments of intercepted missiles rained into the waves. Yet even with several calibers destroyed, enough had slipped through to rock the Ukrainian formation. Damage reports crackled over radios. But there was no pause because the real fight was about to begin. Within minutes, the Ukrainian Air Force scrambled its response. From forward airfields along the coast, MiG-29 Fulcrums and Su-27 flankers screamed into the night sky, climbing to nearly 30,000 feet before rolling east toward the fight. Their mission was clear. Push back the Russian Su-35 prowling above the convoy and keep the skies open for the fleet. They weren't alone. Accompanying them were waves of suicide drones and electronic warfare. UAVs buzzing low over the waves at barely 300 feet. While the manned fighters closed head-on with the Russians, these smaller drones had a different role, slipping under radar coverage, scattering electronic noise, and forcing Russian pilots to split their focus. Radar scopes aboard the Su-35 lit up with dozens of phantom signatures, each demanding attention, each buying the Ukrainians precious seconds. Then the first missiles launched. From the nose of a Ukrainian MiG-29, an AIM-120 AMRAAM streak reeked across the darkness, covering the 6-mile gap in seconds. The Russian pilot banked hard, but the distraction of nearby drones proved fatal. The missile slammed into his fighter's midsection, and in an instant, the jet became a ball of fire. The Su-35 spiraled down, trailing burning debris before it smashed into the sea with a thunderous column of water and flame. The kill electrified Ukrainian comms, but it was only the beginning. Russian Su-35 countered with long-range R-77 missiles, forcing the Ukrainian formation to scatter. One flanker was hit, exploding mid-air before its wreckage splashed into the waves. Meanwhile, drones swarmed closer, peppering Russian aircraft with small explosive charges, not powerful enough to destroy, but enough to disrupt and force evasive maneuvers. By dawn's first gray light, the battle had settled into a brutal equilibrium. One Russian fighter gone, one Ukrainian aircraft lost, and both sides circling, probing, waiting for the next mistake. The sea below was scarred with flaming wrecks, oil slicks, and drifting debris. The message was unmistakable. The opening round belonged to no one. Both sides had bled, and the fight was far from over. The dogfight had reached a deadly stalemate. One Russian Su-35 had fallen in flames. One Ukrainian fighter lay at the bottom of the Black Sea, and both sides circled, wary and waiting. On the surface, the Russian fleet tightened formation, convinced they had contained the Ukrainian convoy. For a moment, Moscow's commanders believed the initiative was theirs. But the illusion of control would not last. Far inland, hundreds of miles from the battle, Ukrainian crews had already launched their next move, a squadron of long-range attack drones, each the size of a compact car, fitted with high explosive warheads. Flying at altitudes under 500 feet, they hugged the terrain, weaving through radar blind spots mapped out from weeks of reconnaissance. Their course was not random. They were locked onto one target, the Russian command ship coordinating the naval assault. The drones arrived without warning. Russian radar operators, focused on the swirling chaos of fighters and cruise missiles overhead, missed the low, silent approach. Suddenly, alarms blared across the command deck as multiple heat signatures appeared less than 10 miles out. It was already too late. The first UAV slammed directly into the forward deck, detonating in a fireball that ripped open steel plating and ignited munition stores. A second struck moments later, punching into the communications tower and showering the bridge with shrapnel. Flames engulfed the vessel as thick black smoke billowed skyward, visible for 20 miles across the sea. Panic rippled through the Russian task force. Without their flagship's radar and coordination systems, ships scrambled to establish ad hoc communications, shouting over jammed frequencies. For nearly 5 minutes, the fleet's command and control was paralyzed. In a battle measured in seconds, those minutes were an eternity. Ukrainian pilots and ship captains seized the opening, maneuvering freely while their adversaries struggled to regroup. The strike was more than just a physical hit, it was psychological shock. Russian crews watched helplessly as their most important vessel burned, emergency teams racing across a deck littered with wreckage. Sailors scrambled to douse the flames, but secondary explosions continued to rock the hull. What had been the fleet's brain was now a smoldering liability drifting amid the waves. This was the turning point. In one coordinated blow, Ukraine flipped the script. The Russian Navy, moments earlier pressing the attack, suddenly found itself blind and reeling. The convoy they sought to destroy was no longer the hunted, it had become the hunter. The strike on the Russian command ship had left the fleet staggering, its nerve center engulfed in fire and smoke. With their coordination shattered, the Russian warships drifted into defensive patterns. But that hesitation was all Ukraine needed. From the decks of their escort vessels, Ukrainian crews moved fast. Launchers hissed as a salvo of Neptune anti-ship missiles streaked into the night sky, each rocket trailing fire across the dark horizon. The missiles arced low over the waves, closing the distance at nearly 600 miles per hour. Russian ships scrambled to intercept, firing off defensive bursts of close-in cannons. Some Neptunes detonated prematurely under the hail of shrapnel, sending geysers of water skyward. But not all. One missile found its mark. With a thunderous impact, it slammed into the side of a Russian frigate. The blast ripped through its midsection, sending flames roaring upward as a column of black smoke rose hundreds of feet into the air. As chaos spread through the Russian formation, Ukraine escalated. From the shadows of the waves, fast attack gunboats and rigid hull inflatables burst forward, engines roaring as they cut across the water at speeds over 40 knots. Armed with shoulder-fired missiles and rocket pods, their crews fired relentlessly at close range. Streaks of flame lanced toward Russian hulls, detonating against decks and superstructures already rattled by the Neptune strike. The night sea transformed into a battlefield of fire. Explosions thundered across the surface, echoing for miles. Tracer rounds carved glowing arcs through the darkness, their reflections rippling in the water. Overhead, UAVs added their own fury, swooping down in suicide dives that lit the surface with fresh bursts of flame. Russian vessels responded in desperation, their guns hammering the night, spraying fire into every dark silhouette on the waves. But with their command ship burning and one frigate crippled, their formation was broken. For every hit they scored, another rocket or drone slammed home, tearing metal apart and feeding the inferno. The Black Sea was no longer a theater of maneuver, it was a furnace. Flames danced across the water, smoke blotted out the stars, and the horizon flashed with relentless bursts of light. What had begun as a calculated Russian assault had now devolved into a free-for-all, where every shot threatened to decide the night. The surface fight raged below, flames painting the waves in orange and black. But the Russians were not done. Desperate to regain momentum, Moscow ordered in reinforcements from the air. A formation of Su-34 fullback bombers thundered in from the east, descending to low altitude as they prepared to unleash guided bombs on the Ukrainian convoy. Each aircraft carried payloads capable of tearing an escort vessel apart in a single strike. For a moment, it looked as if the tide might swing back. But Ukraine had prepared a trap. Days earlier, they had quietly deployed a Patriot missile battery along the coastline, concealed beneath camo nets and operating on mobile platforms. As the Su-34 second closed within 60 miles, its radar lit up, painting the Russian formation just as the first Ukrainian fighters climbed to meet them. Meanwhile, the skies filled with decoys. Swarms of bait drones, small, expendable UAVs rose from hidden launchers, swarming into the bomber group's path. To the Russian radar operators, the air was suddenly cluttered with false targets. Pilots were forced to break formation, swerving and firing precious air-to-air missiles at what were little more than cheap, expendable machines. The cohesion of the strike collapsed before the real battle had even begun. That was when the hammer fell. Ukrainian Mi-29 second and Su-27 second dove in from higher altitude, missiles slashing through the night sky. Almost simultaneously, the hidden Patriot battery launched. The first streak of fire crossed 20 miles in seconds, slamming into a Su-34 with a blinding flash. The bomber erupted into a rolling fireball, pieces of its fuselage scattering across the waves. A second, Su-34 tried to pull up and climb, only to be caught by another missile. The impact ripped its wing apart, sending the jet spiraling downward until it exploded in midair, showering debris into the burning sea below. The remaining Russian bombers scattered, jettisoning payloads prematurely as UAVs closed in. Suicide drones dove headlong into engines and tail sections, forcing panicked evasive maneuvers. Instead of breaking the convoy, the Su-34 squadron had been mauled. 2 bombers destroyed, others damaged, and the survivors retreating east. Above the Black Sea, the night sky was no longer Russian airspace. It belonged to Ukraine. The destruction of 2 Su-34 bombers broke the last thread of Russian momentum. With their air cover shattered and coordination lost at sea, the order went out, retreat east. Engines roared as Russian warships turned away from the burning convoy, zigzagging in desperate maneuvers to escape Ukrainian fire. But Ukraine wasn't finished. From hidden coastal sites and mobile launch trucks, operators released swarms of FPV kamikaze drones, each no larger than a dirt bike but packing shaped charge warheads. Flying at more than 120 miles per hour, they skimmed just above the waves, chasing the retreating ships like hunters after wounded prey. One Russian supply vessel never made it. A drone slammed straight into its fuel tanks amidships. The explosion was instant and catastrophic. A fireball erupted skyward, blinding white at the core, expanding into a rolling sphere of orange flame that towered hundreds of feet above the surface. Shrapnel and burning oil rained down across the water as the vessel broke apart. The shock rippled through the Russian formation. What had begun as a confident assault was now a rout. Ships pressed throttle to full, fleeing farther out to sea, abandoning the contested waters to Ukrainian control. Overhead, reconnaissance drones circled, beaming live images back to Kyiv. On the screens, plumes of black smoke, wreckage drifting in the waves, and Russian ships still ablaze in retreat. The images streaming back to Kyiv told the story in stark clarity. The Russian fleet, once pressing confidently into contested waters, was now broken and burning, retreating under a veil of smoke. The outcome was undeniable. Ukraine had held the line. Their supply corridor across the Black Sea remained intact. In the process, they had crippled a frigate, destroyed a vital supply ship, and downed multiple Russian aircraft. Most importantly, they had forced the enemy's withdrawal. Strategically, the impact was immediate. Russia's ability to dominate the Black Sea was shaken. Commanders now faced a grim choice. Stretch already thin air, defense networks to cover more naval assets, or abandon the notion of unchallenged control altogether. For Ukraine, the psychological balance shifted. The narrative of vulnerability was replaced by proof of resilience and initiative, but questions linger. Would Moscow risk another massive sea-air assault to reassert dominance? Or would it scale back, adopting a defensive posture in waters it once claimed as its own? The next move could decide not just the fate of the fleet, but the course of the entire southern theater. And